Blessed be the Lord my strength, who teacheth my hands to war and my fingers to fight. This is Global Great Awakenings, and we're joined again by the great Dr. Stephen Pidgeon. Stephen, it's great to have you on with us again. There's so much to jump into. We have the riots in the United Kingdom between the Muslim African hordes that have been empowered by the government to rape and pillage and destroy the British as well as the European identity. That seems to have run its course, and the British people are standing up. And you and I have a special familiarity with the British character. So I see this ending with the British people being victorious, the government being overthrown, a civil war similar to Cromwell being undertaken, and these Muslims and Africans either being slaughtered or confined to certain areas. But the British won't back down. I know there's also a lot of suspicion that the Zionists are pushing this agenda, are accelerating and exciting this. I know there's a lot of people that are being exposed, talking about this, that it seems to have an incendiary aspect. But I also see this potentially spreading over to other places. If the British can do it, certainly the Germans can do it, the Swedish can do it, and other countries that have suffered under this globalist Kalergi plan. And then we have also the Israeli-Iran timetable, the ticking time bomb. What is going to happen? When is Iran going to strike back? I think it's a brilliant move for them to kind of delay the gratification and kind of stretch this out and torture the Israelis by keeping them on high alert for a long period of time. And then, of course, what we see happening with Kamala Harris recently pulling this Waltz guy, the governor of Minnesota, as her vice president. Now, I've said all along, I suspected, as you have, something funny was going to be happening, and I still think there's something more afoot that we don't quite see yet, whether it's Barack Obama or Gavin Newsom or some other dark horse being brought in. I don't think this is the last act. I don't think the fat lady has sung yet, even though Kamala Harris isn't necessarily fat. She certainly is a bad singer in this capability. But I think we're going to have to watch and see. But what does that mean? That's another topic. And then we see Scott Ritter being raided today by the FBI, accusing him of being a foreign agent. So there's a lot certainly to talk about. Stephen, I'll hand it over to you to get your opening. Go ahead.
Well, when you talk about Scott Ritter, let's talk about this for a minute, because when you're talking about being a foreign agent, Scott has been, there's a couple of things with Mr. Ritter. Number one, is very well informed. That's a very critical component to this aspect. And he's very well informed from numerous intelligence sources inside Iran, inside Russia, inside the United States. And the question of being a foreign agent is an interesting question. And of course, when you deal with somebody being arrested or investigated, we have to go back to the basic rudiments of law, right? You have what's called a Terry stop. A Terry stop is based on reasonable suspicion, but a search warrant has to be predicated upon probable cause. You have to remember that the Justice Department right now, can find probable cause in a broken taillight, right? Probable cause. Well, you were committing a violation. You were committing a fish and game violation. How's that? Well, you were fishing. Well, how is that probable cause that I created a violation? Well, in our mind, that's probable cause. And of course, contrary speech to the federal government is considered probable cause in the minds of many of these people. We're going to find a way to make that stick. And oftentimes the charges are ludicrous. I mean, the charges that Trump got charged with were of course, ridiculous. But Scott Ritter posed a particular problem. I watched the program that he did with Judge Napolitano on Monday. And Scott, of course, is, I think, notably upset because he is really quite prescient as to what is coming. And he knows how bad it's going to be. And I'm certain that he is very, very frustrated with the fact that the medium range ballistic missile treaty that he was responsible for securing got completely unwound by a bunch of bozos who have no one at the top to tell them no. The demented imbecile that is currently running the country, who's about to be replaced with the imbecile in chief, You got to remember the country is currently being run by Winkin, Blinken, and Nod, right? Winkin is Harris, Nod is Biden, and Blinken, of course, is Blinken. And between the three of them, you've got a blended IQ of around 100, right? And that's assuming Biden is lucid when you're doing the measuring. So, when you see what Ritter is coming through with, and he's seeing this, he's seeing it very clearly. He's a man of peace who can very clearly see the bloodbath that is about to explode upon the blood that is all over the ground already. And when you're involved in seeing true intelligence, Scott, which I know you've seen, of 9-year-old girls getting their jaw blown off, of a woman holding two dead twins in her arms, of fathers weeping over the fact that their 4 dead sons are buried in rubble, 40 feet deep, of schools being burned down full of children while their parents watch them burn to death. These kinds of things are going to afflict the soul of somebody who witnesses these events. They should afflict the soul, but they're afflicting no soul in Israel. It's not having any measurable effect whatsoever on the leadership there. It's like, oh yeah, we're going to go ahead and videotape a rape of a Palestinian prisoner by a mob of guys who broke in for just that purpose, who videoed it and then sent it off to Netanyahu. Here you go, and published it online. So, when you see something like this, you're talking about a completely seared conscience, right? And so Scott, when I saw him on Monday, he was notably upset. I think he was very stern and was delivering a very high-end brief to Judge Napolitano. Now, when I heard some of his briefing, you have to keep in mind that you have to be very careful, particularly when American troops are being deployed, because to leak deployment of troops or the location of troops can be construed as delivering, consequential information. And at what point, can that be construed as being a foreign agent? I don't know. We have the issue of the First Amendment. The First Amendment has routinely, over the years, been protected by a wide body of jurisprudence. But there were exceptions to the First Amendment. One of those, of course, was calling out fire in a crowded theater when there was no fire. That's not protected speech. Obscene speech that incites violence is not protected speech. And speech leaking military secrets is not protected speech under the First Amendment, right? So those things are things that have never had First Amendment protection. Now, how much information did Scott give away? I don't know. I don't think he gave away military secrets. That's my opinion in my initial view of what was going on. He did disclose some things about some assets that are currently in the middle of negotiation. There's a trade going on between Russian spies and American spies in Russia that are currently being swapped, right? And Russia is rounding up everybody they think is suspicious in any respect and holding them so that they can be swapped with Russian spies who have been captured in America, some of whom I think are really not really spies at all. They were just, inconvenient targets, and they rounded them up and said, here you go. And so the Russians want those people back. And so as a consequence, there's been this trade-off going on. Now, in the middle of that trade-off, you got negotiations that are going on at the table. And in those negotiations, it's like buying a new car, right? I'm not buying that car. Why not? Well, the windshield's cracked. It looks like somebody's driven it 100,000 miles. The tires are raw. I'm going to have to replace the wipers. What are you talking about? I'm not giving you that amount of money, right? And so you have this idea of casting aspersions on the other side's argument and bringing the benefit of your people. Your people, on the other hand, were really nasty. And Scott may have influenced those arguments when he talked about the open facts, which, by the way, the facts that he leveled on the table concerning some of the American assets that were being transferred were all public. They're all public knowledge. I mean, you catch them in any social media, you can see what he was talking about. But Scott reiterated it in a very highly viewed form, i.e. Judge Napolitano's show, which, I got to admit, look, I'm very jealous of Judge Napolitano. He launched, about 2 years after I did, and I've got 15,000 viewers and he's got 1.5 million. Now, there's something about my breath, I think, that's keeping people away, Scott. I think that's what it is, But at any rate, Napolitano he made further inquiry. Now, there was also discussion concerning some of the deployment of the troops that are surrounding Israel. and what's going on. But there was very little discussion of that. There was not any particularized discussion of the location of American assets or anything else. And I thought Scott was actually trying to be pretty diplomatic in terms of how he was dealing with the Israeli government. I've seen him be much harsher in terms of his view. But the problem is that Scott, of course, is having an effect. And the reason he's having an effect is because the narrative of propaganda that's coming from the American machine, which has been nothing but blatant lies about Ukraine, and has only, reported maybe 20% of the truth about what's going on in Israel. He's destroying that narrative. And so to the extent that he punches a hole in that narrative, well, then they kind of run out of gas. And now they're at a point where they're very, very angry with Scott because his prognosis of the conflict has been very, very accurate. And their lies have been proven false, 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 and false. And particularly in light of the fact that Ukraine is now on its last leg. Although the stunt they pulled today in Kursk is something we're going to need to discuss here today. And so when we look at this, at the raid on Scott's place, they went in and said, okay, we've got probable cause to think that he's a foreign agent. Well, the probable cause can be based on any, predicate affidavit of somebody in the DOJ, somebody at the FBI, whatever. It could have been Lindsey Graham, that he was very critical of Lindsey Graham.
Yes.
And so Lindsey Graham could have put together an affidavit and said, I don't care what you do, I want that SOB off the street, right? You figure out a way to do it. And Lindsey Graham, of course, is being very aggressive in trying to push for a war with Iran. And Mike Johnson has recently come out and said that should Iran attack Israel, the United States is going to declare war on Iran. I mean, it was just open statement, right? Now, I believe Mike Johnson because I believe Mike Johnson, the Republicans have the capability to, pass such a bill in the House. And remember, as much as Lloyd Austin might want to deploy troops here, there, and the other place, the ultimate decision for declaring war, which hasn't been done since World War II, would come down to Congress. Congress is empowered to declare war on behalf. And Congress has now expressed a willingness, much more willingness to declare war on behalf of Israel than even the State Department is willing to do, right? I think the State Department is willing to deploy assets that are going to be using American aircraft as air defense. They're going to be using it as air defense. So they're going to be a combination air defense situation going on in Israel. I don't know all the weapons that they have there, but we do know that they have Patriot systems. We do know they have Iron Dome. And then if you supplement this with all the aircraft that Israel has, its numerous F-15s, F-16s, F-35s that they have a wide body of aircraft. They have many more aircraft than I thought they had. They have a very large Air Force, probably more functional than ours right now. And that Air Force is going to be used to take down any kind of ballistic missiles coming in. They're going to be using it as air defense. That's what is the suspicion. Well, air defense is one thing. Using them as attack weapons are another situation. If you're running sorties into Iran and so on and so forth. So the show of force could be a nuclear show of force, like the B-2 bomber that's been deployed into the region. And that, too, could be a defensive posture concerning the proposed strikes that are taking place on American assets in Iraq. And so this is something else that's going on. And Syria has launched some new militia that is destroying American-based militias in Syria as well. So Syrian troops are moving against American assets. Iraqi troops are moving against American assets. And Iran is saying that should America engage in this strike that they're going to take against Israel, that they're going to be striking American targets. Now, as we know, the Iranians have a very, very large arsenal of very sophisticated missiles, many of which are unstoppable by Israeli defenses, by American air defenses, including the air defenses we have on board our ships, which are, by the way, in strike range of many of their missiles. I mean, you've got 2,000-kilometer missiles at the beck and call of Iran, right? So and those are highly targetable GPS. Remember that Iran put up satellites, right, to control its GPS range. So they've got a lot of capabilities. So at any rate, where Scott is concerned, he may be in custody right now. He may be in interrogation. He may be in interrogation. Quite often, the FBI will take a person in and they want to get a particular kind of statement from him. And well, I'll go ahead and continue the statement. So what happens, you oftentimes get a custodial statement, a custodial situation where we want to interview you and know you're not free to leave. And so then they sit down and they begin a long custodial inquiry, which could go 10 hours, 11 hours, 12 hours.
They actually he did a press conference outside of his house. I think probably a couple hours ago. Napolitano put it on his channel. So he was outside of his house at microphones, and he essentially said, the FBI came, I let them in. They had a warrant to search my electronic data. This is about something about a foreign agent registration. Never been that, so I'm sure everything will be that'll be determined. So they didn't take him into custody or interrogate him. However, I would say, Stephen, I wouldn't entertain even a 1 second of that kind of an interrogation or discussion. This is a time where Americans need to stand up and say, no, I do not give you permission. I do not give you jurisdiction. I don't recognize your warrant. And plant their feet firmly and say, I'm not going to talk to you in under any circumstances, and not have any conversations with them in any manner whatsoever. These are domestic enemies. And quite frankly, I want to pivot on this because Joe Biden is not the president of the United States. He's not lawfully the president. They got him in by fraud. I would assert that fraud vitiates all contracts, and he is not the Joe Biden of 20, 30 years ago, based on his earlobes and other physical characteristics, which I mentioned in my affidavit when I was back there. So nothing this man says can be interpreted as an order from the president of the United States. This legal wrangling needs to really, I think, be amplified, because we're going to be moving increasingly into a police state direction. And as we've talked about before, there's an increasing amount of people wanting to know what to do in confrontation of the Kamala Harris claim to be president. When Joe Biden is taken out, or when she tries to replace him as president before the election, this is going to happen before November, that needs to be stopped. And no order, no oath, no appointment that she gives, or any of her appointees. No one in the FBI or the State Department has any authority to be acting under the government, authority of the United States. These are arguments that I think need to be increasingly polished and prepared, because they're going to be doing this more and more.
I'm going to speak to this, and so I'm going to summarize her disqualification. She is not a natural born citizen of the United States, so she's disqualified under Article 2, Section 1, Paragraph 5 of the U.S. Constitution. Her birth certificate is available online. You can get images of it if you want, right off Google Images. You'll see her birth certificate. Her father was from Jamaica. Her mother was from India. Neither one of them were American citizens at the time of her birth. She was born in Oakland, California. The only way that her citizenship applies is through the 14th Amendment, which was an act of Congress. An act of Congress is an act of naturalization. Therefore, she is not a natural born citizen. A natural born citizen is a citizen who is born to an American father at the time of their birth. They don't necessarily have to be on American soil, but their father has to be an American citizen when they were born. Okay? And her father was not, and neither was her mother. So she qualifies as an anchor baby, an American citizen, under the case that was expressed in the 1860s of Wong Kim Ark, who was a Chinese national born in the United States to two Chinese parents who were not Americans. They went back to China. He came back to America and said, I'm an American citizen. And they said, how's that? And he said, under the 14th Amendment, I was born here and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And so the court ruled that Wong Kim Ark was a native born citizen, not a natural born citizen. And even then, Kamala Harris had during her lifetime the ability to be a Jamaican citizen, primarily because her father was Jamaican. That was her natural citizenship. She could have been a Jamaican citizen, but she also could have opted into citizenship in India under her mother's birthright.
Right.
And so some point she had to affirm that she was an American citizen. Again, that affirmation, which I haven't seen yet anywhere at any documentation, would still make her a naturalized native born citizen and not a natural born citizen. Natural born citizen comes from the ancient common law doctrine that you shall not have a foreigner rule over you. That's a Torah provision in Moshe's Torah. And it was respected in the British common law that no alien could hold even a place in parliament. No person who was ever an alien could hold a position in the British parliament. That's the same proviso in the natural born citizen. It's just a phrase that everybody pretends they don't understand. And if you raise the issue, all of a sudden you're a racist. And so the fact is she's completely disqualified. Now, who's going to take on that thing? The Trump campaign is going to take it on because they know that she is such an ignorant buffoon, and this person that she's elected to come in as her vice presidential candidate is such a disaster. I mean, this is the good ship Kamala heading out to Jamaica, and Jamaica, man, because it ain't coming back. Now, where the sleepy part here is this. This is a sleep tactic that they're using to put you to sleep. Okay, nothing to worry about. She's got a loser VP. She herself is a loser candidate who is running around doing the most disgusting things as part of her campaign. So pathetically and ignorantly run, it's just ridiculous. So she looks innocuous. She looks like an easy target for Trump. In the meantime, they're working in the back room vociferously against the campaign of RFK, which definitely threatens the campaign of whoever is going to be the successor to Biden.
Which, let me just augment quickly, is another reason that possibly they came after Scott Ritter, because he had just appeared and showed a Twitter photograph of him and Robert Kennedy Jr. having hamburgers.
Yeah.
Scott Ritter had a meeting with Robert Kennedy Jr. and then he was raided.
So because he visited an American nationalist, he's now a foreign agent, right? Because he visited an American nationalist, he's now a foreign agent in the minds of the deep state, right? And RFK, of course, in my opinion, RFK could really clean house should he come together with a ticket with him and Tulsi Gabbard. Okay, if he moved Tulsi Gabbard on the ticket with him as a VP candidate, becomes an extremely viable candidate. Tulsi Gabbard, of course, is a woman of color who's intelligent, an intelligent person, and who also is an American. She has American views. She's an American nationalist, and also a veteran, right? A veteran who went to Iraq, who did not do the deployment like Powder Puff out of the Blue Danube Waltz out of Minnesota, right?
Yeah.
So Blue Danube Waltz is being danced on the good ship Kamala heading off to Jamaica, man. So, but here's the problem. You can see that the state is rising up vociferously against RFK. So, on one hand, you have Kamala playing the part of, I'm just a stupid ditz, and here's my absolutely dead loser vice president. We're just gonna, we're gonna go along like what's his name? Ross Perot and the old general who used to run around saying gridlock.
Yes.
It's going to be as bad a campaign, worse, right? And in the middle of all that comes this seriousness that's going on in the back room. Now, in the back room, let me tell you how serious this is. We're on the verge of World War III. We're right here. I'm not talking about just World War III. World War III has been underway since February of 2021.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about the nuclear escalation of World War III. Now, with this nuclear escalation that's coming, we've got a demented imbecile sitting in the decision maker's seat. The pilot of the ship is a demented imbecile. He doesn't even know he's flying. He doesn't even know what he's doing, right? And so because of that, you have the impetus for two things here, Scott, and these are the two important things. One is economic crash, okay? And remember, you and I talked about this 2 weeks ago, and I mentioned that the economy was the main news, not the war. And we saw the result of that on Monday, which, by the way, was all cured with quantitative easing all around the world. Well, jump part, just print money and dump it in there. I'm going to talk about this on his Vestia, I hope. And then the second issue is that that's one crisis. Okay, a crisis sufficient enough to do extraordinary things. from the executive branch.
Mhm.
Second thing is of course World War III. And World War III, when you see this impetus that is about to break down, and I'm going to get into the details of this here very quickly, but when you see this about to break down, it's very clear that the pressure now is going to mount. I mean, it's going to straight up, and I think you're going to see it come up out of the national media. And it's going to be coming from the Republicans as well. Kamala Harris, you said nothing about this demented imbecile sitting in that office for 3 years, not making any substantive decision. You didn't come forward and tell us that Jill Biden was making the decision. You didn't come forward and tell us Barack Obama was making the decision. You didn't come forward and tell us that Lloyd Austin was acting autonomously, that Anthony Blinken was acting autonomously, that Jake Sullivan was acting autonomously, and that Joe had no idea what was going on. Who was signing the executive orders? Who told him which executive orders to sign? Who made those decisions? People, inquiring minds want to know. And you hid that from the American public. You were in conspiracy to disguise the fact that we had no president and that someone unelected was making presidential decisions. And you didn't come forward with that info. So the more this push comes on, the push comes back to the table on the 25th Amendment. Okay. Because just because Joe stepped out of the campaign doesn't mean we have intellectual competency in the White House at the time World War III is breaking out. At the time the greatest economic collapse in American history is happening. Where's the leadership? The pressure is going to mount, and the pressure is going to come from the mass media because they're going to demand what? They want to demand that Biden step down so that Harris is running from a position of President Harris.
Yes.
See? Not from a position of candidate Harris, who, by the way, as a Democrat, received not one vote, was moved into the slot by a secret meeting of a closed cabal at the upper ends of the Democratic Party without asking anybody, any precinct captain, anybody anywhere in the country to vote for her at any point. These are Democrats, right? These are the people who favor our democracy, and they have absolutely no Democratic trappings whatsoever. They are as anti-Democrat as the hardest hardcore Bolshevik you ever met.
Yes.
In fact, I would go on to say that even Stalin had elections. Yes. They were all fraudulent and rigged, but at least they had elections. She's moving ahead without anybody ever saying, yeah, let's have a competing. Oh, where was the contest for the nomination? Oh, we don't have a contest. We just, and when for them to say, well, look, we didn't have a contest because Joe secured the nomination and he can step down and put his replacement in place. The only way he got that nomination was because Kamala Harris protected the fact that he was a demented imbecile at the time the Democrats nominated him. They defrauded the Democratic National Convention. Every single Democrat in the United States has been defrauded, and Kamala Harris was part and parcel of the fraud, as was Jill Biden, as was Anthony Blinken, as was Lloyd, as was anyone who sat at the table with him in the conference room of the White House or in the Situation Room or visited him in the Oval Office. They all knew he couldn't find the door. He couldn't find the front door of the White House. He couldn't find the bathroom. So when you see all that, when you see these are all people that were conspiring to hide this. The first one that they defrauded was the Democratic National Committee, and they defrauded it in order to advance this communist Kamala Harris, who is nothing but a puppet for the deep state, who's going to be doing exactly what they told her to do. And she's a useful idiot. I mean, she really is a useful idiot. And she has no idea. She's going to be expunged like that when they're done with her. So the media is going to start harping about the necessity to remove the incompetent Biden, the mentally incompetent Biden, because we're in such a crisis. And you're going to crisis. Oh, this is a crisis. This is the crisis of crises. This is it. This is the big one. Okay. Right. And then Red Fox shows up. Elizabeth, it's the big one. Right. So when you get to that point, then what happens? She comes forward and the whole of the cabinet realizing that they got one of two choices. They can either push Biden out or they can all get indicted for engaging in fraud to cover up his incompetency. Those are your choices. And so there'll be a 25th Amendment move. They're going to force him out. So now she's President Harris. And so when the debate happens between Kamala and Trump, it's going to be, and President Harris, what's your opinion about blah, blah, blah? And ex-president, convicted felon Trump, what's your opinion about blah, blah, blah? And that's how these biased propagandists, deep state intelligence assets are going to manage the debate.
Mhm.
So when you see that kind of idea, you see how they can paint this in, right? Now, because she's president, who gets to raise the issue that she's not natural born? Oh, I'm sorry, that issue is moot. She's already taken the oath. She's already the president. That issue is moot. You can't say it anymore. She was already inaugurated. To the extent that there was an issue, that issue is dead because she's already nominated, right? The issue is moot. Okay.
But is it though? But is it, or can it, and must it be challenged? Because again, if it's fraudulent, if it's found out that she's not who she says she is on paper, it's just the same as if she's wearing a rubber mask and there's a Chinese face underneath there.
Well,
That has to be challengeable, and that's what the affidavit idea is, writing an affidavit of sworn jurat and submitting it to your local government, your sheriff, your board of electors, everybody and anybody. You're even going down and filing an action in court, an injunction perhaps to stop the Kamala Harris person from assuming the presidency because she's not qualified. There seems to be a legal block that must be able to be defensible.
Well, again, the action we took against Barack Obama, who also never established his American citizenship, was quo warranto, a quo warranto action. It was the standing that we had to bring the action. And even though we had, like in one case, we were representing Alan Keyes. Alan Keyes came, well, I wasn't in on that action, but another lawyer who was involved in this was. Alan Keyes was a candidate on the same ticket. He absolutely had standing, and the judge ruled that he had no standing. Sorry. They disqualified every case there was to disqualify, just as they disqualified every case trying to say that the pandemic violates all the fundamental aspects of the Bill of Rights. Oh, you guys are all disqualified. Those cases are all dismissed, 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 dismissed. We're finding as a matter of law, like Washington did, that the masks are effective at preventing the transmission of a virus, even though the box itself says cannot prevent the transmission of a virus. Yeah, look. Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes, right? Just forget it, right? So at any rate, I think all of that stuff is going to be non-effective, Scott. All of that's not effective because there is no rule of law. What you have is a criminal cabal that is occupying the federal government. They're entrenched. They don't care about the Constitution, the rule of law, or anything else. They have their own personal agendas. They're using the alphabet agencies to secure their personal agendas. So when you meet with a nationalist, chances are you're construed as a foreign agent. If you believe in the Constitution, well, then you're a constitutionalist, right? And you're a domestic terrorist. You're a domestic terror to them, the criminals that are overthrowing the country and looting the place, which is what they're doing. It's not, people think that these guys are engaged in communism or this, that, or anything. They're not. They're just looters. They're just looters.
Yeah.
And they're looting it from the inside out, and they've looted it to the tune of $36 trillion. That doesn't include the interest payments, right, that have been made on the national debt. That doesn't include, which are clicking at $1 trillion a year now, right? This is all going to 32 families, right, that own the Federal Reserve. So when you see this kind of thing, so I think seriously, what's happening in the back room is before they get to the debate with Trump, they're going to advance Kamala Harris to the presidency. They're going to force the 25th Amendment. Now that she's picked the vice presidential candidate, they're going to force the 25th Amendment. And so now it looks innocuous. Gee, she's picked a non-entity here. We don't have to worry about him doing anything radical or anything else. So let her advance to the presidency. See, it's calm, right? Now, will she pick the Blue Danube Waltz here to be her vice president should she advance to the presidency? That's a different question. And equally true, she may come in and say, oh yeah, I'm going to appoint him to the vice president. So now this is the president and the vice president, right? The guy who approved of transgendered surgeries for children in the schools, the guy who was an LGBT, proactive agitator, a guy who stood back and refused to let the National Guard show up when the George Floyd incident happened, a drunk driving convict, a guy who abandoned the military. And he's going to try to be the leader. He wouldn't even lead his own troop, let alone now he's going to be the leader of the country. Hey, why don't you abandon that to run for another office there, Slick, instead of doing this? And, so anyway, he is, this is a cover for what's coming, because what's coming is this. Looks innocuous, looks like Hubert Humphrey, right? The Hubert Humphrey campaign, which, by the way, was slaughtered by Richard Nixon in 1968. It looks like the HHH campaign, which came in as a result of the deficiency of LBJ, right? You remember LBJ could have run
Yep.
in 60. LBJ said, I'm not going to do it. HHH comes in, and his campaign was a disaster, as was Walter Mondale's a disaster.
Hmm.
This one looks like it's going to be equally a disaster. In the
Hmm.
back, the people who approved of her candidacy, by the way, all committed a federal crime. She's
Hmm.
not a foreign citizen, and they've approved of her candidacy. They've committed federal crimes. Every one of them.
Hmm.
It was in
Hmm.
they've committed federal crimes. And so they don't care either, right? They could care less. And so when you move into this next stage, the next stage is okay, we're in a crisis. Now what? This is the opportunity for Harris to come in and say, okay, we're in a crisis. We've entered into World War III. We've had events take place here. Maybe a carrier is sunk, something like this goes down. We have to declare martial law. We have to lock down the country. We have to lock down gasoline. We have to go into food rationing. We have to go into gas rationing. We all have to be, the draft begins. Let's get all the women and men, whether they want to go to war or not, they're going to war. 55% of Americans do not approve of fighting on behalf of Israel. We're going to force you into a uniform and you're going to go to war. And so they're going to initiate the draft, and they're going to appoint, I believe they're going to appoint a chancellor. They're going to appoint a chancellor who is going to suspend the elections in November. And this chancellor is going to say we're on a wartime economy, just as they're doing in Ukraine right now.
Hmm.
The penis clown, Zelensky.
Zelensky.
And Zelensky is, he's once again, this stunt that he pulled today, this attack on Kursk,
Yeah.
and you remember, Scott, I mean, Kursk is where, I spent a lot of work doing mission work
Hmm.
with my friend Yuri Mikhailovich. And, now there was a young woman, pregnant young woman, who
Yes.
by this invading Ukrainian force. They love to kill civilians, they do. And my understanding is the Russians have completely repelled the attack and
Hmm.
have smashed 50 armored vehicles, 3 tanks, 260 troops, and they're rounding up what's left of the Ukrainian army that made this encroach into Kursk. Now, let me say this. This is a kinetic act of war. This is an invasion
Yes.
stage Ukraine of ground forces onto Russian soil.
Yep.
Sufficient ground, in my opinion. If I were the Russian president, I would come out tomorrow and say, this is a declaration of war against Ukraine. One thing for you to have, random terrorist targets flying in drones and hitting some apartments in Belgorod or sending something into Moscow, a rogue this, a rogue that. Now you invaded with an army. That's a direct act of kinetic war. Now we're invading you. Now we're declaring war on Ukraine. Now there's not going to be a choice. We're no longer doing an SMO. We're declaring war on you, and we're not going to stop until we get an unconditional surrender.
Hmm.
And then I would start with serious pounding. They've got 1,152,000,000 shells from North Korea.
Yeah.
How they do? I want to find out how they're going to do. And it would be an immediate assault. I would come across Kharkiv. And I would go, I would come down through Sumy off the Kursk region, and I would move the Belarusian troops into Western Ukraine to prevent the Polish troops from coming in. And then I would sweep my southern troops into Odessa, and I would put at least 100,000 troops in a headlong assault for Ukraine. And look, just between me and you, if you construe this as a civil war like we had in the United States in the 1860s, the Civil War was disposed when a certain General Sherman started in Nashville, Tennessee, and burned a scorched earth trench all the way to Savannah, Georgia,
Yep.
including burned it all to the ground. And
Hmm.
every point, he burned it all to the ground. That's what Sherman did. And
Yep.
when Sherman was done doing that, the South said, well, I guess we're done, which they were.
Hmm.
Now, if Zelensky doesn't want to get the hint, then you're going to have to bring in something like that. Can't be any more of this. Look, as far as I'm concerned, the Russian tactics have been very, very good, right? I think they've been very, very good because what they have done is they have essentially secured all of the regions that have voted to join Russia.
Hmm.
Donetsk, Kherson, Zaporizhia,
Hmm.
and Crimea. So they secured all these regions for Russia, except they left the periphery at the edge open in order to draw in Ukrainian invasion troops who were all going to do the spring offensive. We're going to do the spring offensive. And they were going up against classic Russian military defensive lines, which in this case were 15 miles deep. They never
Mhm.
succeeded in penetrating even one, the very first line. And instead, they suffered horrific losses because apparently Kuleba and Zaluzhny had no experience with Russian defensives.
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, you didn't know there were going to be mines all over the place. I don't know. But the trap at Bakhmut, which was a meat grinder, the trap at Avdiivka, which was a meat grinder, took down thousands of troops. Shoigu just came out with a statement that said in the last 2 months, the Ukrainians have lost 115,000 troops.
Yeah.
Now, these are lives that should have never been put at risk and should
Yeah.
never have been sacrificed on this battlefield. Never should have never happened. You either win or you lose. If you know your king is going to be taken, then tip your king over and call it a day and sue for peace, which the Russians have been willing to listen to a suit for peace. But
Mhm.
Zelensky won't do it because it's not him. He doesn't get to make the decision. The decision is made in Washington, D.C.
Mhm.
Oh, no, you still have some Ukrainians left to die. How much do you think Americans care about the Ukrainian man? Zero. You guys should fight to the last man. We want to get rid of all of you Ukrainians. If Ukraine had been smart, they would have started this war. And then once the war was started and Russia moved its troops in, then they should have said, we've rethought this thing. And we no longer want to be any part of the West. So we're just going to keep all of your Abrams and all your Challengers and all your Leopards and all your M29s and everything
Mhm.
else. Thanks. And they now belong to Russia. We're joining Russia. Thank you. Then,
Mhm.
then what would NATO do? Right?
They would
That,
have been alive. They would have been alive and a lot more prosperous with a lot more hope. Ukraine would still be a nation, not a burned out wasteland, a no man's land. And I think one of the other tactics they need to do, Stephen, are declaring regions of like Odessa, sanctuary regions, where there is no grabbing people off the streets and throwing them into Russia, into the Ukrainian military. There's already a lot of these trucks being burned and stopped. I've said for a long time they need to start having special engagement, special forces shooting these Ukrainian soldiers that try and grab people off the streets. But they need to start declaring sanctuary zones in independent zones. They have to start peeling away these areas of Ukraine. The problem has been the Ukrainians are so damn stupid. They really are some of the dumbest, most stupid people on the planet. Because as Stanislav, a friend of mine, he's a former American Army officer. He lives in Russia. He was born over there. And he said, Scott, the Ukrainians have this philosophy, this attitude, this brain retardation where they don't do anything until the fire is at their house, right? They're not going to get up and help put out the fire until it's at their doorstep. Well, when it's at your doorstep, you're done. And the Ukrainians have behaved like that the entire time. Oh, my neighbor's getting dragged off into the army. I'm just going to sit here and videotape it. You're not gonna shoot the bad guys. You're not going to get in with a vigilante force to stop it because they're going to come after you tomorrow. Oh no, no. I mean, it's amazing how stupid these people are.
well,
But that's
it's a philosophy in the mind, right? It's a philosophy in the mind. And the key thing is to be sold this bill of goods about the heroism of Stepan Bandera. What a bill of goods they were sold on this idea. And hate Russia, hate Russia, hate Russia. Look, there was a lot of bad things that happened under the Soviet Union, okay? And the Russians recognized that. And Russia had to turn away from Sovietism and they had to embrace a new thing. And they did. They turned from that. Now, there are some old hardliners that want to go back to the days when we sat around and smoked bad cigarettes and waited in line for shoes, right? But it's about 1% of the population. Everybody else has said, we want a new life. And when you think historically about what's going on, and eventually I am going to I do want to talk to some people involved in this because when you look at the history of Russia being the successor to the Byzantine Empire, right?
Mhm.
Byzantium fell in 1453. There was a daughter of the last king of the Byzantine Empire. His name was Zoe Paleolog. And she traveled to Rome and was trained up to convert the Tsar of Russia to Roman Catholicism. She went to Russia, instead learned to speak Russian and converted to Orthodoxy, where she was born under Orthodoxy. And she took on the name Sophia and married Ivan III. And this created a succession in the Romanov Tsars, the Romanov Tsars. It created a succession that succeeded. The Byzantine Empire was immediately succeeded by Mother Russia. So this is historic. This is a historic fact that Russia has always considered itself the third Rome and the steward of Byzantium.
Yes.
The Byzantine Empire was much larger than Western Rome, and when it fell, this empire simply moved its capital from Constantinople to Moscow. And so this is, when we look at Orthodoxy now, we see the Byzantine Empire being expressed in Eastern Orthodoxy. The anomaly was the communist atheism of the Soviet Union. That was a 70-year anomaly. It was a 70-year dark period in the history of Russia.
Imposed by the West and the Zionist Jewish Talmudists.
Yeah, it was atheist Talmudists that ran the thing. And they slaughtered 66 million Russians in the greatest genocide of the 20th century. No question, it was the greatest genocide of the 20th century. So let us hear Russia talk about that. And Russia is going to have to say, I mean, look, I saw the red granite statue of Stalin in Moscow that had been placed in the Park of Fallen Statues. You go over here, Stalin, and they put it up, they poked his eye out and put it up in front of a wall of skulls. That is appropriate for Yosef Jugashvili, a murdering SOB, murdering, slaughtering, tyrant of the worst degree. And so, okay, so I have nothing good to say about Stalin. That's it. But the excesses that were done by the Soviet Union in Ukraine were done by Stalin and Nikita Khrushchev. Okay? So you guys have to let go, because Russia is not that place anymore. But to embrace the excesses of Stepan Bandera, who slaughtered 120,000 Jews himself, as a murderous, genocidalist, with the Nazis who were in genocide. We just watched a brilliant film yesterday, and unfortunately I can't remember the name of it, but it's about a young boy who joined the Belarusian army to fight the Nazis, and basically he just go, I think he finally fires his rifle for the first time at a picture of Hitler at the end of the thing, but he went through a grave difficulty where he got caught by a German forward garrison who was burning villages in Belarus. And they had burned 628 villages, by the way, historically. And a particular village where he was, they had gathered all the people up into the church, locked all the doors, and then one of the commanders sticks his head in and says, "Leave the children behind and come out and you can live." So there wasn't a single parent that left the children behind. But this kid had no children. He climbed out through the window. And so he climbed out through the window, and they burned the church down with all the children in it. And this is what they did, village on village on village, right? And so when you see the crudeness, and it's very, very accurate in this film, very accurate about what happens when you have a bunch of men out killing people who are loaded up on meth, don't care, right? They could, and they had a girl that they had gang raped. I don't know, 40 guys gang raped this girl. And you see her at the end of the movie standing next to this boy, so completely gone, or psychologically completely broken, psychologically, completely gone, right? And so this is the kind of thing that the Bandera embrace. They say, this is our hero. This is nobody's hero. This was nobody's hero at any time. And so Ukraine has been misled by a bunch of propagandists, giving them a narrative, saying one of the propagandists was Bojo, who said, "We're going to stand behind you until the very last Ukrainian is dead." And that's exactly what he meant. You're not all dead yet, so keep on going, right? And you could have had a resolution to this. You could be sitting there building your capital. But Zelensky got himself a $200 million casino out of the deal. He's got a $40 million house in Miami. He's got a $20 million house in the UK, right? King Charles sold him the family home. The very home where Harry and William grew up is going to be Zelensky's pad when he's in the UK. This is the kind of wickedness that goes on in high places. at any rate, I do think you're going to see. So Putin is meeting with the Security Council right now. They're discussing this invasion of Kursk. And I think at this point, they've got a casus belli, as Dima Medvedev would say, they've got a casus belli to make a declaration of war.
Mhm.
That's it. You made a kinetic move into on Russian soil. We're going to declare war, and now we're making a kinetic move on Ukrainian soil. And they know right now that across the south, particularly in Zaporozhye and moving towards Odessa, there's no troops down there. They're down to so few troops, they have to concentrate them in certain battle lines. So the whole defensive line of Ukraine, which has been keeping the Russians at bay, is no longer a defensive line. They have many breaches in that line. The wall has been breached. And so Russia has the capacity to just go, okay, let's just roll to Kyiv from here. Let's roll right on up through, let's roll up through Nikolaev. Let's roll up through here. Let's roll into Odessa. Let's just roll in
Mhm.
and call it a day, right? And the fact that these F-16s are there, it portends ill will. Now, I sent you something tonight. I haven't had a chance to verify it. But if that video is in fact accurate and that it represents something that took place in Rostov, then that would be a demonstration that, in fact, the F-16s have been outfitted with 61A tactical nuclear devices, and one has been used in the Russian theater. Now, I haven't been able to verify this, Scott. I have not been able to verify this video.
Well, let me play it just so we can have it for people to see, because I think it's important. You just sent it before the show started, so it could be. But let me play it real quick. This is the video, and you can tell us what we're looking at here. It looks like a nuclear mushroom cloud to me.
Yeah, now there's a number of evidences here that indicate that this is a mushroom cloud.
Two of them actually. There's one. It was two bombs or two ignition points.
Yeah. Now the second ignition may have been an armory of conventional weapons, or if possible that it was also a nuclear weapon. But you can see here, if you okay, now you see the stem comes up, right? When you're
Yeah,
talking about a conventional bomb, the bomb blows up this way, and then maybe the cloud will come up, but you don't have this idea of the stem of the mushroom cloud
yeah,
coming, and then the articulation inside the stem of electromagnetics. Okay, these are some of the things that give away a nuclear device is when you see, and you can see that you see the sparks down here on the left. You see all
yeah,
this?
yeah.
So this is an indication that this may have been a nuclear blast. Now, this I don't know that this video is current. I haven't been able to substantiate the accuracy of this video. The person who put this video up said this was a current video from Rostov, Now, Rostov, the official name of this Gorod is called Rostov na Donu, okay, or Rostov on the Don River. The Don River is a river that empties into the northeastern corner of the Sea of Azov. You might recall the Azov Battalion and
Yeah.
Mariupol. And Mariupol sits on the northwestern coast of the Sea of Azov. The Kerch Bridge is a bridge that spans the southern portion of the Sea of Azov. The Sea of Azov then empties into the Black Sea. So Rostov-na-Donu is to the east of the Sea of Azov, reachable, potentially reachable by F-16s flying out of Romania and skirting over the Black Sea and then launching a 61A or 61B tactical nuclear weapon at this target. Now, I'm not saying that that's what happened. I don't know that that's what happened. I don't know that this is a current video. I don't know that this is an accurate video. The person who put it up said this was a blast that happened last night in Rostov. Okay. So that's what I'm going to leave it at that source. So we
Yeah.
can get it verified, but I can tell you that if in fact that was the use of a tactical nuclear weapon on Russian soil, what do you think the answer is going to be?
Well, Russians won't play around. They'll use their tactical nuclear weapons in any way they deem necessary to extinguish this fight very quickly.
Yeah. Now, if you see that we've got we got a group of criminals running the United States who are in the process of looting the country. One of the things they want to do to perfect their crime is to cause a nuclear war where the evidence of their crime gets blown up in nuclear bombs while
Yeah.
they're out in their estates in Hawaii or
Like the Building 7 and the World Trade Center tower in 2001.
yeah, where there has to be where the evidence of the crime has to be destroyed. And do they care how many people go down? Do they care the trauma they inflicted on New York City in 2001? None. They had no consideration. Did they care about the firefighters who lost their life in those buildings? Not one little bit. And so here we see an even more careless attitude, a reckless attitude. We don't live here. Let them die in a nuclear war. So if this in fact was a strike from an F-16, the F-16s are based in Romania right now, most of them. And so they're in Romania, and there may be some in Poland. But these are Danish F-16s that are really at the end of their life, but they're still functional vehicles, and they can still carry nuclear tactical weapons like these.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the case, the Russians are very likely to use Kinzhal tactical nukes in response. So Romania is going to end up getting nuked. Poland will end up getting nuked. Maybe Germany ends up getting nuked. In short, all of the NATO capability at the short end of its capability, those places that can move quickly into Ukraine, once you've unleashed one, the Russian response could be 3, it could be 8, it could be 20. Who knows? But the entire capability of NATO could be disposed of in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think it would be done quickly. I think Russia wouldn't mess around. They would use overwhelming force because they know NATO and these NATO countries and the US really don't have the stomach for fighting. They're all bravado. They're paper tigers. And when it comes right down to a real knuckles fight, fist fight, they won't be able to endure. They'll throw up their hands in some sort of peace negotiation.
Well, they like to beat up on women and children,
Yes.
and unarmed civilians, right?
Yes.
So at any rate, so this is a very interesting thing. Now let's talk about what's on the horizon in the Middle East, in the Levant. So there is a very famous day in Jewish history, and I want to specify it's Jewish history and not the House of Israel history. So
Mm-hmm.
not Hebrew history, okay? Because when you look at what happened, I've got to go through this pretty quickly, but David was made king of Judea, and he had unified the kingdom. And Solomon, when he became king, expanded that kingdom. But Solomon worshipped and established the worship of other gods. And when he did, his kingdom was taken away from him in his son's reign, and it was divided between a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. The bottom kingdom became Judea. Yahud was its Hebrew name, but we call it Judea. This was Judea. And the tribes living there were Jews, Benjamites, and the half tribe of Levi. So these are the 3 tribes living in the southern kingdom, called Judea. Well, in 586 BC, the temple of Solomon was burned to the ground by Nebuchadnezzar. That happened on a date called the 9th of Av. You remember that the Jews are on a different calendar. The Jews are on a calendar that is a solely lunar calendar, and their months have different names. So the year usually begins in March or April, and the months have different names. And the 5th month of the year is called Av. It's called Av. And then the 6th month is called Elul, and the 7th month is called Tishri. And so, and Tishri marks the beginning of the new year in the 7th month. It's kind of hard to understand. But at any rate, so this 9th of Av became a pretty important day. It's set out in scripture. It tells you it was the 9th of Av that Solomon's temple was burned to the ground. And this was in the siege of Jerusalem. And there were over 1 million people slaughtered by the Babylonians when they were taken captivity at that time. Now, fast forward to 70 AD. When we get to 70 AD, Herod's temple, sitting there on in Jerusalem, is destroyed. And this was a temple run by the Jews. And this temple is destroyed by Romans, who burned it to the ground, and every stone of it was removed. That happened on the 9th of Av in 70 AD. Now, in 1492, there was an Alhambra decree that was enacted by Ferdinand and Isabella in Granada at the Alhambra complex. And in this decree, they ousted all of the Jews and all of the Moors from Spain and Portugal. And that happened on the 9th of Av in 1492. Columbus set sail the following day on the 10th of Av for the New World with 3 shiploads full of Jews. Okay. And Christopher Columbus himself, Cristobal Colon, was in fact Jewish. Then you get to the expulsion of the Jews out of England, which happened 200 years later on the 9th of Av. So the 9th of Av is a well understood date in Jewish history. It's a date of catastrophe and devastation where both temples were destroyed. Now, you might recall that there has been a push by a group called the Temple Mount Institute, who has been trying to build a third temple on the Temple Mount for a long time. And the idea of this Temple Mount is to tear down the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque that are up there, to destroy the Muslim presence on top of the Temple Mount, and to put up a quote-unquote third temple. It's not a third temple, it's actually a fourth temple, but that's another discussion point. But they want to put this temple up there. Well, in order to do that temple, they had to prepare the temple instruments. All the temple instruments are made, right? All of these are discussed in the book of Leviticus. The temple instruments, the menorah, the show table, all the labor, all of these things are all discussed. They have them all prepared, but they have to be sanctified. And to sanctify those instruments, you have to slaughter the red heifer. And the red heifer has to be without blemish. It can't have a single white hair. It has to be without blemish. Then the red heifer is sacrificed, and it's burned outside the camp, and its ashes are taken and mixed with water, and the temple instruments are soaked in those ashes, that ash water, to make them ceremonially clean for the temple. So this red heifer was scheduled to be sacrificed on October 7th of last year. That's when the red heifer was going to be sacrificed. So Hamas, who was looking at the fact that there were over 1,000 Palestinians that were just erroneously arrested, kind of like the January 6th defendants, just for no reason, and tossed into prison, no trial, no defense, no nothing, just tossed into prison, where if they feel like you're Hamas, I guess they get to rape you. But they tossed him into prison, and Hamas said, look, we want to get them out, so we're going to take hostages. Well, the so-called hostages they took were people in Israeli uniform. Remember that men and women serve in the Israeli military. And so it was men and women in uniform that Hamas captured and took in as hostages, for the most part. And the idea of Hamas was, number one, to prevent the sacrifice of the red heifer in order to protect the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock Shrine. To protect those two, we have to stop the sacrifice of the red heifer. And the second thing was to trade these hostages for these more than 1,000 Palestinians currently in prison without any future of anywhere in sight, right? And so this was the goal. And so from this event, which was an intelligence event that Netanyahu allowed to happen so that he could bomb Gaza into oblivion and initiate this show of force, Netanyahu did not recognize that the world was going to turn against him because he's so filled with bloodlust. He does not understand that that's going to look like genocide to people, and people aren't going to abide it, particularly when you're killing U.S. aid workers, distributing food, sniper firing at nurses attending babies in a maternity ward, blowing up hospitals, burning down schools with children in them with their mothers watching. These kinds of things are not going to be taken as friendly acts. And 55% of Americans now are standing up and saying, we want nothing to do with defending Israel. That number is much higher in the Democrat Party, by the way. It's over 70% want nothing to do with Israel. Okay, so with all that happening now we're poised at looking at the 9th of Av. So the 9th of Av, according to Chabad Lubavitch, begins at sundown on August 12th. Okay, that's 5 days from now. 5 days from now. Sundown on August 12th will be the 9th of Av. And you can rest assured that the Muslims in Iran, the Muslims in Lebanon, the Muslims in Yemen, the Muslims in Syria, the Muslims in Iraq, they all know it's the 9th of Av. And they all know exactly what they have planned for Israel. And what they have planned for Israel, I mean, Nasrallah came out and said today, we're going to destroy $34 billion worth of your warehouses, factories, infrastructure in 1 hour. In 1 hour. And Nasrallah has told them before, we have all of your stuff targeted. We have your fuel depots targeted. We have your air bases targeted. We have your Knesset targeted. We have your Supreme Court targeted. We have the bunker where you're going to be hunkering down, Mr. Netanyahu. It's targeted. We have the Dimona power plant targeted. All of these things have been targeted. They're all ready to go. And that's just from Hezbollah. And Hezbollah, we know they've got like 10 Iron Dome systems in there that are capable of shooting 180 rounds. That's 1,800, right? What are you going to do when you have 10,000 missiles coming in? They've already proven there was drones sent in from Lebanon yesterday that were striking Israeli positions. Iron Dome was not capable of taking them down. They know right where the domes are. They move them outside the perimeter of the domes, and then in come the drones. And so the Houthis have prepared their hypersonics. All of this is just from Houthis and Hezbollah. We haven't talked about what Iran is going to do, but Iran has said Israel has given us no choice. They came in and assassinated the Hamas mediator on the day the president of Iran was being inaugurated.
Yeah.
It was to shame the Iranians and to treat them like they were dogs and animals, and to do so on their soil. We have the capability of killing anybody we want whenever we want, and we're going to assassinate whoever we want whenever we get around to it, and we're going to assassinate all their successors. So now Iran is taking the position, this is irreversible. So Shoigu is in Iran saying, okay, look, we'll mediate. Who are you going to mediate with? You're going to mediate with Netanyahu? Netanyahu has nothing in mind except war. And he wants to use the Samson option, which of course is going to be nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at this, the idea of nuclear weapons being used, so my expectation is this, Scott. The Muslims are going to look back and go, okay, here's what we want. We want Netanyahu to use some of those 12 kiloton nukes. Lebanon, Iran, wherever, where we want him to touch off some of those nukes. The Russians have already placed advanced Iskanders, and those are probably nuclear Iskanders in Iran. And the Pakistanis, I saw the footage yesterday, are shipping in the Shahed 2 nuclear missiles. They're coming right over the border right now. They're driving them over the border right now. So in case you're wondering, Israel, whether or not Iran has nuclear weapons, they now have access to up to 300 weapons that are coming in from Pakistan that are coming over the border right now. So don't let there be a question in your mind whether or not they have these weapons. They have them. And they're probably in the range of 90 to 100 kiloton bombs. They're in that detonation range. And so there's not going to be one or two. There could be, 40 or 50. I mean, how many, you think a Patriot system can take out a bomb that detonates at 100,000 feet? Suppose they were to do something like this. Okay, I'm going to send in 4 ballistic nuclear missiles. First one comes in and touches off at 100,000. Second one comes in, touches off at 75. Third one comes in, touches off at 50. Fourth one comes off and touches in at 25,000. Last one hits the ground. And I'm sending them 8 minutes apart. So America is saying, okay, well, look, if you do that, Mike Johnson is like, if Iran attacks Israel, we're definitely going to declare war on Iran. Did Mike Johnson ask the American public that? No, because Mike Johnson doesn't represent the American public.
No, that's right.
And, how about any of the other Republicans that gave 58 standing ovations to the genocidalist, the psychopathic megalomaniac running Israel? How about those people? Oh, they're going to vote it right in.
And then you come to, is that going to be the trigger for an American Civil War? Are you going to see what's happening in Britain happen in America? Because there's no way I think Americans would allow any of their sons, daughters, or themselves to be drafted or pushed, or any of this activity to be initiated. I mean, we seem to be at that level of standing up and breaking with the U.S. government, saying you're dissolved. There's I mean, what the British government have done to the British people is what the American government has done to the American people in different ways. And I'm just wondering, do you think there's is this predictive programming that what they're doing in Britain, they're going to try and unleash in America?
Yeah, and it's very interesting because the programming that's going on in Britain is a very interesting ploy, because it's not being initiated by the king and it's not being initiated by the prime minister. It's being initiated by the World Economic Forum and the agents behind the EU, namely the banking interests that are based in the Crown of London, in Basel, Switzerland, the Vatican. These banking interests are giving the decisions. We're going to replace these people who have an expectation under the English Bill of Rights, that have an expectation under the common law, that expect the rulership to be continuous as it has been for the last 2,500 years on the British Isles. We have to get rid of those people and replace them. And this is an ideology that is forwarded by the radical Talmudists who believe that they have the right to rule the world and that everyone else is an animal, that is the only reason they're on earth is to serve them. So they need to remove anybody else that is a threat to that proposition. And that includes the House of Israel, that is the British people. And because this is who we're talking about. We're talking about the House of Yasharel. That's who we're talking about. That's who they're at war with, because they are Esau. And they are at war with Jacob. That's what the deal is. And so this is why this is why our own government has been waging war against us. The United States is at war with the American people and has been since 2001. They've
Yeah.
been American people. We're going to take everything from you. We're going to steal everything from you. We're under an emergency edict. We're going to take away your writ of habeas corpus. We're going to declare a Patriot Act. We're going to force you to strip naked before we allow you on an airplane. We're going to sell, we're going to sell naked pictures of you, from your airport search around the world. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to do the other thing. This is the kind of things that have been going on with the federal government. You don't know that, but the first scanners that they introduced, that the TSA introduced, were scanning naked people. They would create a naked picture of you, and they sold 100,000 pictures of naked children to the Dutch. That's what they did the first year that it was open. And that finally had to be removed because the pedophilia was becoming a little bit too obvious. This is before, the Pizzagate thing broke. But at any rate, when you look at what's going on here, when we finally got to the lockdown, we hate to break the news to you, but a bunch of you people are non-essential. You have to social distance. You have to get tested. You have to do this. You have to do that. You have to do the other thing. All violations of international law and federal law. Violations of federal law. And they all went along with it. Every judge went along with it. Every governor went along with it. Every police department went along with it. They all committed crimes against the American people. And the American people, 79% of which acquiesced to that. They acquiesced to that protocol. So here we are. They're about ready to do again. I'm already hearing the rhetoric. We're going to need 2 weeks to stop the rise of this bird flu. Saw that being announced today. We need 2 weeks to stop the rise of this bird flu. Here they come. It's the same stupid playbook. Same batch of lies that resulted in 35 million dead in the last one. How many more do you think they intend to kill now? So the question is this: when we look at where we're going, can we dissolve the American government by consent? Yes, we can. We can. But you have to remember that the last time that was tried was in 1860, when Abe Lincoln tried to pull the same stunt, and the American people went to dissolve the government, and Abe Lincoln declared martial law and then engaged in warfare. And a great slaughter of Americans took place. What was 2.5 million died in that war, right? That was a great slaughter of Americans engineered by an agent of the British Crown. He was an agent of the British Crown. And, so when we look at this now, this is the proposition that is about to happen in the United States. So I'm not agitating for dissolving the American government, because there is something else that's going to dissolve the American government. That's the collapse of the dollar.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something, of course, Mike Johnson doesn't care about this one a little bit, because he does what Benjamin Netanyahu tells him to do. So him launching a war against Iran is going to guarantee the Straits of Hormuz are closed.
Mm-hmm.
Probably going to lose a couple of carriers when this war starts out.
Yep.
Hezbollah, Iran's going to sink the other. The Houthis are going to close the Red Sea. And the Houthis are if Saudi Arabia lifts its head even a little bit to support Israel in strikes on Iran, that's going to be the end of the Saudi oil producing capability. So you can see oil go absolutely out of sight. It's not going to be available if you could get it. And if you could get it, it's going to be priced 5 times higher than it is now, which is going to drive virtually whatever manufacturing is left in the United States out of business. It's going to be gone. You're not going to be able to get plastic cups for your Starbucks cup of coffee anymore. Those things will all disappear. And so you're going to see, I mean, I saw an economist forecasting this today that you're talking about radical bankruptcies. So you have to remember that the collapse that took place on Monday was the greatest collapse ever in the history of the Taiwanese market, in the history of the Japanese market. The South Korean market would have set records, but they shut it down. There were all kinds of people shutting down their markets because their markets were in a free fall collapse. Bitcoin's in a free fall collapse. I mean, you're seeing stuff collapse at an absolutely unprecedented level. Then in comes all the central banks. Oh, well, here, we'll print up some money. So it looks like the markets recovered. They didn't recover. You just saw an inflationary spike bounce another 10%. So the inflation spike that's coming now in the United States, which has been 40% over the last 2 months. You bought groceries lately, Scott?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is going up.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. I'm telling you, man,
Yep.
you come out of the grocery store, $200 for 2 bags of groceries.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we look at. That's what we look at up here in Alaska. 200
Mm-hmm.
bucks for 2 bags of groceries. So, when you see these prices going through the roof, you're going to see a complete collapse of the economy. And the dollar is already, there's no support for the dollar. It's not a petrodollar anymore. The only thing supporting the dollar right now is the fact that it's come off the cliff and it hasn't started to fall, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like Wile E. Coyote. He's
Yeah.
in those last seconds where he's standing there before he goes, right?
Yeah.
Right now. And so when the dollar crashes, that will be the end of the federal government. And that will be the end of the criminal cabal. They will have choked the golden goose to the point that the golden goose dies. And that's it. They're not going to get another golden egg. They've looted the country as far as they can loot it. And the looters, those who are involved in the looting, most of them who've had some kind of foresight about them, they're going to be doing the disappearing act. Where they're going to disappear to, that's a good question. But I think you're going to see them move into wilderness areas. You might see some move into Upper Canada. You might see, out in Ontario, maybe Nova Scotia. But you're going to see people trying to move into wilderness areas where they cannot be found for the crimes that they committed in destroying the United States of America.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be sloppy. Some of them will just flat admit, oh, yeah, I was one of those guys who was involved in this, that, and the other. Some of them will admit it. Others won't. Others will be very careful. They'll change their name, disguise their identities, and give you a completely false history about who they are. But they're going to be getting out of this eastern seaboard that's going to be the subject of massive destruction. So let's just talk about that. So the 9th of Av. So it looks kind of like this. Israel has said that a preemptive strike on Lebanon, which everybody is accusing that they've already decided to do, would be quote unquote irrational. Oh no, that would be irrational. Yeah, yeah, it would be irrational. And part of the reason it would be irrational is that, first of all, if they use neutron weapons there or low yield nukes, there's going to be radioactivity that's going to sweep across, Safed, Kiryat Shimona, the Golan Heights, all of that area is going to be hit with radiation blasts. And in addition to that, it is going to give absolute permission for Iran to use nuclear weapons in response. Okay? So Iran is sitting back, and of course, Nasrallah is like, yeah, you're going to get spanked. It's going to happen. Just sit in your room and wait for it. Sit in your room and wait for it. It's going to happen. It's certainly going to happen. Sit in your room and wait for it. And the Israelis are pretending like they don't notice, but they're absolutely freaked.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is now, if before the 9th of Av, and I do believe that Israel is going to strike preemptively, I believe they're going to strike preemptively. And it's going to happen before the 9th of Av. And they're going to strike somewhere. They're going to be using nuclear weapons to do it. And it's going to be obvious to everybody they're using nuclear weapons when they strike above the Israeli Lebanon border. When they strike up in that area with nukes, then you're going to see on the 9th of Av a destruction leveled against Israel that is going to be historic, greater than what happened in 70 AD. It will
Yeah.
be in 70 AD. It will be the biggest single destruction of Israel ever witnessed in the history of the world. And when it's over, there will not be an Israel to speak of at all. There'll be nothing. And the Congress, that is, their puppets sitting in the US Congress are going to go, what? Now, if Mike Johnson turns around when this is over, an hour later, there's no Israel left, and he says, well, we're declaring war on Iran. Well, go ahead and declare war, Mike, but you can, you might as well just set your clock put a 30-minute timer on there, because in about 15 minutes, the Sarmat 2 is going to be over Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's how I see it going. So the problem is that there is nobody in DC that is being given any rational advice. There's no one giving them any rational
No,
advice.
there's an amazing delusion, and I mean it's a madness. It's something that I mean it's right out of a you know what it is. It's right out of that scene from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, where the thuggy cult followers are all on their hands and knees and wagging back and forth, and they're watching the high priest pull a guy's heart out, shalila, shalila, and all the Indian dudes are just enchanted and mystified. This is Mike Johnson and all of these Zionist Republicans and Democrats up there. They're in this delusion of religious sanctimoniousness, we can do no wrong. Come on, man, we're the United States of America. We're untouchable. I mean, this is the strong delusion to believe the lie. God gives them over to strong delusion. And I say that because they're laughing, they're smiling, they're chuckling. I watch videos of Lauren Burbert walking out, and she says in a militant tone, "There are two nations that were created to bless God, United States and Israel, and I will defend both." And blah blah blah. And I'm listening to these people, and I'm thinking, agree with a lot of what they say on the domestic policy level when they stand up against LGBT, or they stand for this or that, or the right to keep and bear arms. But when you go off the rail, off the reservation, off the bridge on this Israel thing, you've lost your mind, and nothing else matters, because this is the singular issue, the singular choice and game that will determine whether the United States of America lives or crumbles. This is the entire matter, is Israel, because you have pitted the United States as the absolute tag team partner for Israel, that's going around hitting everybody in the face and then running away into the middle of the wrestling arena, and is trying to tag America in to take over the fight, and it's going to end in the United States of America being destroyed. But the delusion is something, it's biblical. I've never seen anything like this before, where there is such madness and a celebration of their madness. I don't know how else to describe it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'll hand it to you, Steve.
That's accurate. And let me explain it. 2 Thessalonians 2, Paul prophesies about the coming of the man of lawlessness. And he says that people will be given over to a great delusion because they have refused to love the truth. And because they have refused to love the truth, they will be damned. That's the language in 2 Thessalonians 2. It's also discussed in Romans 1 about being given over to a deceived heart. This has also happened. That's what the LGBT movement has done, is given people over to a great deception. Romans 1 will tell you all about it, beginning in verse 18. Now, scripturally, these people are ignorant. It would really help if they would read their Bible, and if they actually had a pastor that told them something. But I was talking with a group today where I teach on Sefer Academy. We were talking, and I was asking a guy who was a pastor in Melbourne, Australia. I said, "How many people in your congregation do you believe has read the whole Bible cover to cover?" He said about 2%. 98% have read nothing. They've read nothing. So their idea of Christianity is watching a couple of YouTube videos and singing a worship song or two. And so when you look at it, first of all, there's a very critical phrase that Paul gives us. He says, "By your confession of faith in Mashiach, you are an heir and a true son of Abraham." Okay? So the son of Abraham, the heir of Abraham, is not somebody by race. It is somebody by their confession of faith. This is a New Testament premise that is solid. If you have not confessed the Messiah, you are not an heir of Abraham. Okay? That's just the way it is. And so when you have a group of people saying we're the chosen people, that they can't prove that they were ever linked to anybody in the house of Yasharel from a DNA point of view. In fact, their DNA points back to northern Greece and nowhere else. So when you look to this idea of, okay, we're the chosen people, well, no, you're not. The scripture says those who bless Abraham will be blessed, and those who curse Abraham will be cursed. And you're not talking about a nation called Abraham. You're talking about the seed of Abraham, his generation. And the generation that was blessed of Abraham was Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, or Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it was Jacob that was the father of who became known as Israel. Really, Yasharel was his real name, but Israel. And when he became Israel, and the blessing is on the house of Israel, not on a nation that called itself Israel, that is really Idumea, the Edomite kingdom, who took on the name Israel. And they are not Israel. So if you ignorant people who think you're quoting scripture, you don't know what you're talking about. You're the blessing of those who bless Israel, that is the blessing of the house of Israel, the 12 tribes. And those who curse Israel, these guys are not of the 12 tribes. Premise number one. Premise number two, that's not really Israel. If it was anything, it would be Judea, not Israel. If it's only for the Jews, it's Judea, it's not Israel. Show me where it says those who bless Judah will be blessed and those who curse Judah will be cursed. Show that. Show me that verse. You can't, because it doesn't exist. Okay? So for you to sit here and say that Israel is a righteous nation when they are Messiah deniers, they go to the synagogue every Saturday and curse Christians in the 18th paragraph of the standing prayer called the Amidah, and their rabbis teach that Mashiach himself is boiling in a vat of semen in the lowest level of hell. That's taught in Israel every day. How do you say that those who do that are not Antichrist? How do you say that those people are chosen and blessed and heirs of Abraham? They are not heirs of, not if you read it, not if you're a New Testament believer. If you believe in the New Testament, if you've given a confession of faith in the Messiah, that cannot come out of your mouth because you don't know what you're talking about. You are scripturally dead wrong. You are an ignorant fool who hasn't read a thing. Yeah. Stop believing the pop press that's fed to you by somebody like John Hagee.
Yes.
You need to get into your own scripture and read. Look, Mike Adams said it point blank. Hey, look, you don't need to have any sermon for me. Try reading your Bible. Try reading it. Just read it. Just read it. That's what, what's his name said? Bullard. E.W. Bullard in his companion Bible. He said, if you would just read this, if you just read it, see what it says, right? And when you read it, you discover that, guess what? These lies are a pack of lies. It's a total mythology. The house of Yasharel, which, by the way, we discovered where the 10 tribes are. We know who the 10 tribes are. The 10 tribes are really scattered all over the world. Every tribe, every tongue, every nation has members of the tribes, racially speaking. When you're talking about that. So this is why race is not an issue at all. And this was proven very, very clearly when Paul starts talking about the circumcision and the non-circumcision. If you're circumcised, okay, does that guarantee you a path into heaven? No, the Torah says point blank, if you're circumcised and you don't keep the Shabbat and you don't respect the 10 commandments, then you are to be treated as though you were not circumcised. So the circumcision becomes uncircumcision. So the physical circumcision in the flesh means nothing. The circumcision of the heart means everything. Yeah. And the circumcision of the heart confesses that you have a creator. And that creator was made manifest. The word was made flesh and tabernacled among us. Yeah. This manifestation of you either believe this or you don't. If you believe that, if you've been baptized into that, then how dare you give money to somebody who is cursing your brother, who is bombing a church full of Christians, who is slaughtering people who are of the same faith, and you're giving them money and you're claiming you're going to commit your country without question as to all of their war crimes and all of their excesses, and you're just going to put American lives on the line and you're just going to do it blindly when you're stupid and you don't know what you're talking about? You ignoramus. Yeah. How dare you even open your mouth when you don't know what you're talking about? Yeah. So that's really the truth of it, Scott. The truth is, that's what the truth of Scripture is. And, it's a fundamental point. We are of the kingdom because of the confession of our mouth.
Yes.
We confess that Mashiach that came in the flesh, that he was the Word made flesh. He was the Word of Yah made flesh, that Yahusha is Yahweh to the glory of the Father.
Yes.
That this was the manna, it's like Mashiach says, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father, because that's all you're going to see, because the Father is an all-consuming fire.
Mm-hmm.
When you see Mashiach, you have seen the Father.
I and the Father are one.
Yeah, exactly. What does it say in Isaiah 9, right? Unto us a son is born, unto us a child is given, and upon him shall be the government, right? And
Mm-hmm.
he shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty Yah, the Everlasting Father. What? The Son shall be called the Everlasting Father? That's what it says. He shall be called the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace, right? So, you need to figure out what this is. If this is your faith, if you claim that's your faith, then you need to stand up for it, because it is a confession of faith. It has nothing to do with your race.
Mm-hmm.
And it has nothing to do with your identity theft, calling yourself. What if I run around calling myself Israel? Hey, guess what? I'm Israel. Those who bless me will be blessed. Those who curse me are going to be cursed. So cough up some coin.
Yeah.
I want the 36 billion this year. I'm Israel. I want the 36 billion. You know what, Scott? I am Israel. I'm Yasharel, just like you are Yasharel.
Yeah.
We
Amen.
are. And so, where's our money? Eh? Where's our blessing? Right? And if you don't think it's not true that those who bless us will be blessed and those who curse us will be cursed, just wait till you see what happens when you guys launch this little event for these people who call themselves chosen.
Mm-hmm.
Wait till
Mm-hmm.
you see what happens. Wait, you're going to see it. Then you'll find out how blessed you are when there's nukes going off. I'm going to ask you, these people who are such, citizens of Israel, joint citizens, right? I want to ask you guys a question. How well is your blessing going now that we're $36 trillion in debt? Our social order is falling apart. Our manufacturing's gone. Our industry's gone. We've got homelessness all over every street. We've got the highest levels of suicide ever seen in the country. We can't man our army. Would you say we're blessed? Would you
No,
say we're blessed?
it's a good point. It's a great point. Stephen Pidgeon, we're coming to the end of the show. I wanted to give you a last few minutes to give us your closing thoughts. Go ahead.
Well, here we are. We're coming up on the 9th of Av. The 9th of Av will be the evening of August 12th, going into August 13th of this year. A devastating day in Jewish history. Will it be another one? That's a question. The second issue is this. Notwithstanding the war that looms large on the horizon, a nuclear war that could be started by the Jews launching a nuclear strike against Lebanon and on a tactical basis, giving permission for Iran to retaliate with devastating nuclear force, forcing the United States to retaliate against Iran using subs and other devices to obliterate Iran, resulting in a Russian strike that's going to terminate the United States once and for all. That is the escalation pattern that is currently on the table that could begin as early as Tuesday night, next Tuesday night, okay? Now, other than that, we have this economic situation, which who is the leader leading us out of this economic situation? What proposals have been made to keep the dollar from collapsing? Where is the push towards a commodity-backed currency? Where has anybody said balanced budget to anybody, anywhere, at any point, and let's arrest this debt? Where is any discussion about that anywhere by anybody at any time? It does not exist in the Western world. Instead, we have Jamie Dimon saying, we're going to ride this pony until it drops dead. And that is the expectation, that this pony is going to drop dead, and it's going to drop dead in the very near future. Notwithstanding any of the BS you see about the Dow Jones Industrials, about whether or not the Fed is going to drop the interest rates 1.5 basis points, it makes no difference. The dollar is in crash mode. It's going to come to a complete grinding halt. So the United States of America comes to an end one of two ways. One, the dollar goes to zero and there is no government. Two, it's destroyed in a nuclear holocaust. Either way, for the rest of you out here, you don't have to agitate. You don't have to revolt. You don't have to file an affidavit. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is sit back and get a little bit of tobacco, put it in your corncob pipe, and whistle Dixie.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Indeed, we will see what happens. I think that's a good note of are we a blessed nation when we have homelessness, LGBT, suicide around every corner, and every form of disintegration? Very accurate. Stephen Pidgeon, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your blessings of wisdom. We will certainly be watching and see what happens. And the 9th of Av, as it approaches, and we will see what happens in Russia, Ukraine, the Israel scenario, and the British civil wars that seem to be brewing. We will tune in and keep it appraised. See you next time. God bless you. Good night.